The studio was cold that morning. Not physically cold, though the February air had settled into the corners of Capitol Records' Studio A. The coldness was something else entirely. It lived in the space between Nat King Cole and the sheet music sitting on the piano, between what he wanted to be and what the world was asking him to become. I'm not recording this. The words hung in the air like cigarette smoke, four syllables that could derail an entire career. The studio musicians shifted uncomfortably. The producer checked his watch, and Maria Cole, standing just outside the recording booth, felt her heart sink, because she knew what this moment meant. This wasn't just about a song. This was about identity, artistic integrity, and the terrifying possibility that sometimes the thing you hate most is exactly what you need. What happened in that Los Angeles studio over the next 3 hours would change popular music forever. But it would start with a man who couldn't stand the song he was being asked to sing. Before we dive into the moment that transformed Nat King Cole from a respected jazz pianist into a global phenomenon, let me ask you this. Have you ever been forced to do something you absolutely hated, only to discover it changed your life? Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from, because this story about ego marriage and the songs we think were too good for is universal. The year was 1950, and Nat King Cole was at a crossroads he didn't fully understand yet. To the jazz world, he was already a legend. The Nat King Cole trio had revolutionized jazz piano starting in the late 1930s. Their approach was groundbreaking piano, guitar, bass, no drums. The space between notes mattered as much as the notes themselves. His instrumental work was sophisticated, nuanced, technically brilliant in ways that made other pianists shake their heads in admiration and frustration. Critics praised his arrangements. Musicians studied his technique, trying to decode how he made complex harmonies sound effortless. He was the pianist's pianist, the artist's artist, the kind of musician other musicians respected with an almost religious devotion. He'd grown up in Chicago, son of a Baptist minister, surrounded by church music and gospel traditions. But jazz had called to him like a siren song, that blend of structure and freedom, discipline and improvisation. By his 20s, he was playing clubs, developing a style that was uniquely his, clean, clear, elegant. No wasted notes, no showing off for the sake of it, just pure musical intelligence made audible. The trio's instrumental recordings had earned critical acclaim. Straighten Up and Fly Right had been a hit, but the market for instrumental jazz, as sophisticated as it was, remained limited. Club audiences, record collectors, fellow musicians loved it, but the broader American public, they wanted something different, something they could sing along to, something that felt less like an intellectual exercise and more like a friend speaking to their heart. But respect doesn't pay the bills. Not in 1950, not when you have a family, not when you've got a mortgage in Hancock Park, Los Angeles's first integrated neighborhood, where you're proving a point just by existing. Not when Capitol Records is watching your sales numbers with increasingly concerned expressions, wondering if the investment is worth it. Nat had started singing almost by accident. A drunk patron at a club had demanded vocals. Nat, just trying to keep the peace, had obliged. His voice, smooth as aged whiskey, warm as summer evenings, turned out to be something special, something the public wanted more of. But Nat didn't want to be just a singer. He was a musician, a composer, an artist. Singing felt like pandering, like choosing accessibility over artistry. Jazz was complex, challenging, intellectually demanding. Pop singing was, in his mind, something simpler, something beneath what he'd worked so hard to master. His wife Maria saw it differently. Maria Ellington Cole was not just a wife, she was a force. Born Maria Hawkins in North Carolina, she'd been a singer with Duke Ellington's orchestra before meeting Nat. She understood the music business not just as a romantic pursuit, but as an industry with rules, opportunities, and brutal realities. She'd seen talented artists disappear because they refused to adapt. She'd seen mediocre performers succeed because they understood what audiences craved. She loved Nat's jazz work, absolutely. She could listen to him play piano for hours, lost in the complexity of his improvisations. But she also saw something he couldn't see yet, something that frustrated her because it seemed so obvious. The voice that could reach millions, the warmth that could transcend genre, the star hiding behind the piano, afraid of his own potential reach. She'd fallen in love with his voice before she'd fallen in love with him. That smoothness that felt like honey and heartbreak mixed together. That ability to make even simple lyrics sound profound, and she'd watched him minimize it, dismiss it as just singing. as if vocal artistry was somehow less legitimate than instrumental virtuosity. They'd been arguing about Mona Lisa for 3 weeks, and each argument followed the same pattern. Nat would intellectualize his resistance. Maria would appeal to his practical side. Nat would dig in deeper. Maria would grow quieter, not because she was giving up, but because she was waiting for the right moment. The song had come from Capitol's publishing arm, a sweeping theatrical ballad written by Ray Evans and Jay Livingston for the film Captain Carey USA. Lush orchestration, dramatic phrasing, romantic imagery that verged on purple prose. Everything Nat instinctively recoiled from. It was too much, too obvious, too commercial, too far from the understated elegance he'd built his reputation on. It's not jazz, he'd told Maria over breakfast, pushing the sheet music across the table like it was contaminated. It's not supposed to be jazz. Maria had replied calmly, pouring his coffee. It's supposed to be beautiful. It's manipulative. It's theatrical. It's everything I've been trying to move away from. It's a song millions of people might love. I don't care what millions of people love. I care about what's true to who I am. Maria had looked at him with those eyes that had first captured him years ago, eyes that saw through his defenses. Who you are is complicated enough to contain both things, Nat. You're not betraying jazz by singing a beautiful song. But Nat wasn't convinced. His identity as a serious musician felt fragile, constantly under threat from the commercial pressures of the recording industry. Every pop song felt like a compromise. Every vocal recording felt like he was choosing easy applause over artistic credibility. The night before the scheduled recording session, he'd called the producer. I'm not doing it, he'd said. Find another singer. This isn't my style. The producer, a patient man named Lee Gillett who'd worked with Nat for years, had sighed. Nat, just come to the studio tomorrow. If you hate it after one take, we'll scrap it. But at least try. Why? So I can hate myself for selling out? So you can make an informed decision instead of running from something you're afraid of? That had landed. The suggestion that he was afraid, that his artistic principles might actually be fear wearing a sophisticated disguise. So he'd shown up, but only because Maria had asked him to, had stood at their bedroom door that morning and said, please, just one take. For me? For her? Not for Capitol Records, not for the money, not for some abstract audience. For the woman who believed in both versions of him, the jazz virtuoso and the voice that could make the world stop and listen. Now he sat at the piano in Studio A, staring at sheet music he'd already memorized despite claiming to hate it. The studio orchestra was arranged behind him, strings, brass, woodwinds, a lush, romantic arrangement that made his skin crawl with its obviousness. Whenever you're ready, Nate, Lee Gillett's voice crackled through the speakers from the control booth. Nat looked through the glass at Maria, standing beside the engineer. She gave him a small nod, not encouraging exactly, more like acknowledging the weight of what she was asking him to do. He took a breath, placed his fingers on the keys, and made a decision that would haunt him for the next 60 seconds. He would sabotage it. Not obviously. Not so anyone could point to it and say he'd been unprofessional, but subtly. He'd sing it straight, technically perfect, emotionally distant. He'd give them exactly what the notes demanded and nothing more. No warmth. No connection. No vulnerability. He'd prove that the song didn't work, that it wasn't him, that his instincts had been correct all along. The orchestra began. Strings swelling like a sunrise, romantic, unsubtle, exactly as theatrical as he'd feared, and then he sang Mona Lisa, Mona Lisa, men have named you. The words came out perfectly, pitch perfect, rhythm perfect, phrasing technically flawless. But empty, he could hear it himself. He was singing at the song, not with it, performing the notes while refusing to inhabit them. He glanced at Maria through the glass. Her face was unreadable. You're so like the lady with the mystic smile. The second verse felt worse than the first. The orchestra was giving everything. The arrangement was building, asking him to meet it emotionally. But he couldn't. His artistic pride wouldn't allow it, except something strange was happening. The song itself was fighting back. The melody, despite his resistance, was finding places in his voice he hadn't known existed. The lyrics, theatrical as they were connecting to something deeper than he wanted to admit. The image of a woman mysterious and distant, smiling but unknowable, was resonating with feelings he'd buried under years of jazz sophistication. Is it only 'cause you're lonely they have blamed you? His voice cracked slightly. Not a technical mistake. Something else? A crack in the wall he'd built between himself and the material. For that Mona Lisa strangeness in your smile all, He was still trying to hold back, still trying to prove the song wrong. But his voice, that instrument he'd spent years refining, had its own intelligence. It knew what the song needed even when his mind refused to acknowledge it. The final verse approached. He had one more chance to maintain his emotional distance, to finish this technically perfect, but soulless take and prove his point. Do you smile to tempt a lover, Mona Lisa, and then, against every instinct, every plan, every intention to sabotage this recording, Nat King Cole stopped fighting. He didn't make a conscious decision. It was more like surrender, like his voice recognized something his mind couldn't yet accept, that this song, theatrical and obvious as it seemed, was actually about something real, about loving someone mysterious, about trying to understand a smile that never fully reveals itself, about the distance between what we see and what we feel. Or is this your way to hide a broken heart? The last line came out different, vulnerable, true. Not jazz, not pop, just human. A man admitting that he didn't understand love, didn't understand women, didn't understand the mystery at the heart of connection. The orchestra finished. Silence filled the studio for 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours. Nat sat at the piano, hands still on the keys, unable to look up, because he knew he'd failed at sabotaging it. He'd accidentally given them something real. Lee Gillette's voice came through the speakers, quiet, almost reverent. Nat, we're keeping that. No, Nat said immediately. I can do better. That was perfect. Maria's voice cut in. She'd taken the microphone from the engineer. You finally stopped thinking and started feeling. I wasn't trying to. I know. That's why it worked. Nat finally looked up at her. Maria's eyes were wet. She was smiling, but it was the Mona Lisa smile. The one that acknowledged complexity. The one that said, I know you better than you know yourself. The recording session ended. The musicians packed up. Nat sat alone at the piano for 20 minutes after everyone left, staring at the sheet music that had defeated him. Maria found him there, sat beside him on the piano bench the way she had 1,000 times before. You okay? She asked. I hate that I liked it, Nat admitted quietly. Liking something doesn't make you less of an artist. It makes me less of what I thought I was. Maybe what you thought you were was too small to contain what you actually are. That night, driving home through Los Angeles streets slick with February rain, Nat was quiet. Maria didn't push. She knew he was processing something bigger than a recording session. He was processing the possibility that his identity was more flexible than he'd believed. That artist and entertainer weren't mutually exclusive categories. That jazz and pop weren't enemies, but different languages for similar truths. What if people think I've sold out? He asked as they pulled into their driveway. What if they think you've evolved? Maria replied. Capitol Records released Mona Lisa in March 1950. No fanfare, no massive promotional campaign, just another single from Nat King Cole, the jazz pianist who sometimes sang. They pressed the standard number of copies, sent it to their usual radio contacts, and waited to see what would happen. The response was immediate and overwhelming in ways that shocked even optimistic Maria. Within 72 hours, radio programmers from New York to Los Angeles were reporting unprecedented listener response, not just requests, demands, people calling stations multiple times, asking when the song would play again. Music retailers reporting they'd sold out their initial stock within hours and needed emergency shipments. Nat heard about it secondhand at first. He was rehearsing with the trio, working on a complex arrangement of Body and Soul. When his manager called, the singles exploding, the manager said, voice crackling with excitement over the phone line, radio can't keep up with requests. Have you heard from Capitol? Nat hadn't. He was trying to process what exploding meant. Success in jazz was measured in thousands. Sold out club dates, respectable album sales, critical recognition. This sounded different. This sounded like something bigger and more terrifying. Radio stations added it to heavy rotation instantly. Not just the jazz stations Nat was accustomed to, but pop stations, easy listening stations, even some country stations whose programmers heard something universal in the romantic longing. Listeners called in requesting it multiple times per hour. Record stores couldn't keep copies in stock. Distributors were shipping emergency pressings. Within 2 weeks, it was climbing charts Nat had never appeared on before. Pop charts, mainstream charts. Charts that measured not critical acclaim but genuine popular connection across demographics he'd never imagined reaching. The first time Nat heard himself on a major pop station, he was driving through Hollywood, heading to a trio rehearsal. The DJ introduced the song with the kind of breathless excitement usually reserved for Sinatra or Crosby, and now the song everyone's talking about, Nat King Cole's Mona Lisa. He almost pulled over. That warm, vulnerable voice coming through the car speakers was his, but it sounded different in this context. Not like a jazz musician making a concession, like an artist saying something true that millions of people needed to hear. 8 weeks at number one. 8 consecutive weeks where the song Nat had hated became inescapable, where cab drivers whistled it, where teenagers slow danced to it at sock hops, where mothers hummed it while cooking dinner, where fathers sang it in the shower. It crossed every demographic boundary capital could measure. Young and old, black and white, urban sophisticates and rural families. Everyone, it seemed, needed to hear a man wonder about the mystery behind a woman's smile. Nat watched his career transform in real time. Suddenly, venues that had considered him too niche were booking him. Television wanted him. Film offers arrived. The jazz world was still there, still respected him, but now he existed in a larger universe too. The strangest part was how his relationship with the song changed. At first, performing it felt like wearing someone else's clothes, but repetition did something unexpected. Night after night, singing Mona Lisa to audiences who'd never cared about jazz piano but cared deeply about this song, Nat began to understand what Maria had known all along. The song wasn't betraying his artistry, it was expanding it. Jazz had taught him complexity, nuance, technical mastery. Mona Lisa taught him something equally valuable: directness. The power of saying something simple so beautifully that it touched people who'd never studied music theory, never cared about chord progressions, but understood what it felt like to love someone mysterious. 6 months after release, Mona Lisa won the Academy Award for Best Original Song. Nat attended the ceremony, watching from his seat as others accepted an award for a song he'd once refused to record. The irony wasn't lost on him. A year later, Capitol wanted to record an entire album of similar material: ballads, romantic standards, accessible songs designed for maximum reach. The old Nat would have refused immediately. The new Nat, changed by one recording session where surrender had proven more powerful than control, agreed. That album, and the ones that followed, established Nat King Cole as one of the defining voices of the 1950s. Not the jazz pianist Nat King Cole, though he never stopped playing, but Nat King Cole, the interpreter of American song. The voice that could make any melody feel intimate, personal, true. Unforgettable would come later. Nature Boy would come later. Dozens of songs that would define American popular music for generations. But they all trace back to that morning in 1950 when Nat tried to sabotage a song he hated and accidentally created magic. Years later, in an interview Nat rarely gave, a journalist asked him about Mona Lisa. You've said before that you didn't want to record that song. How do you feel about it now? Nat was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled. Not the public smile, but something smaller, more honest. That song taught me that I didn't know everything, that my wife was smarter than me, and that sometimes the things we resist most are exactly what we need. Do you like the song now? I love what it taught me. I love what it gave me permission to become. The song itself, he laughed softly, still a little theatrical for my taste, but Maria was right. It's beautiful, and beautiful matters. Maria Cole outlived her husband by decades. After Nat's death from lung cancer in 1965, she became the keeper of his legacy, the protector of his music. Interviewers would ask her about Nat's career, his transformation from jazz musician to pop icon, and she'd always circle back to the same story. There was a morning in 1950, she'd say, when Nat sat at a piano and learned that being great isn't about protecting who you think you are, it's about being brave enough to become what you might be. The recording of Mona Lisa still exists in Capitol's archives. The original master tape, slightly degraded but preserved. Audio engineers who've studied it point out something most listeners never notice. In the final verse, there's a barely perceptible change in Nat's voice, a moment where resistance becomes acceptance, where a man stops fighting a song and starts singing it. That moment, invisible to most ears but present in every note afterward, is the sound of transformation, of ego surrendering to truth, of an artist discovering that the thing he thought would diminish him actually revealed who he'd always been capable of becoming. Today, Mona Lisa is in the Grammy Hall of Fame. It's been covered by hundreds of artists. It's considered one of the definitive recordings of the 20th century. Music students study it. Singers try to capture its intimacy, and very few people know that the man singing it had tried his hardest not to care. The song Nat King Cole hated saved his career, but more importantly, it saved him from the prison of his own artistic rigidity. It taught him that growth sometimes looks like betrayal, that evolution sometimes feels like surrender, that the songs we need to sing aren't always the songs we want to sing. And sometimes the person who knows us best is the one standing outside the recording booth, asking us to try one more time for them, believing we're capable of something we can't yet see in ourselves. Maria knew, she'd always known, and on a cold February morning in 1950, she convinced her husband to stop protecting who he was and start discovering who he could be. All it took was one song, one recording session, one moment of surrender disguised as sabotage. The Mona Lisa smiles in the Louvre, mysterious and unknowable, and somewhere in a recording studio archive, a voice smiles too. The voice of a man who learned that sometimes the thing you hate is exactly the thing that will set you free,